For Your Misinformation is part of the Demcast family of podcasts. What's up, everybody? I'm Katie.
And I'm Morgan.
And this is For Your Misinformation, a podcast dedicated to empowering women to be more politically engaged so we can act in our own best interests.
Let us break down the problem and tell you what we're doing and what you can do to help solve it.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi, Katie.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited about this bonus episode today.
I know. We have a very special bonus episode this week with Mike Monetta, who is here to explain what Wolfpack is. If you remember our episode from a few weeks ago about dark money and ending Citizens United, Wolfpack is all about getting a 28th Amendment money out of politics. And Mike was a really awesome guest, a really interesting person to talk to. I had a really good time, learned a lot.
Yeah, we love Mike, and Wolfpack is awesome.
Come back anytime.
Yes, definitely come back. We would love that.
So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you learn a lot. Enjoy this bonus Thursday episode, and we will talk to you guys next week. Enjoy the interview.
Yeah.
I'm excited today because we have Mike Monetta with us, who is the National Director of Wolfpack, which is an organization that fights for a 28th Amendment to get money out of politics. So if you haven't yet listened to our episode about dark money, go back and listen to it. Essentially, what is at stake here is that the Supreme Court ruled that money is the same as free speech and that dollars are the same as like speech bucks, and people who have more money get more free speech than the other people. And that's just fundamentally unfair. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. We're really excited to have you here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
There's never a bad time to have a conversation about the 28th Amendment, but I think right now it's just like especially pertinent because all anybody is thinking about right now is elections, and it's like we gotta talk about one of the many things that's wrong with the way we do elections in this country.
Global pandemic that we're all still in the middle of.
Yes.
Just one extra layer of stress. It's fine. Okay, so you've been working on campaign finance for years, right? So what prompted you to get started with Wolfpack?
Yeah, I got started with Wolfpack. I think that the exact same way that a lot of people that are in politics do, which is just you start to pay attention, and you realize that if we don't get involved in some way, then things are they're going to keep going in the wrong direction. So I spent most of my life not in politics. I kind of long for those days, in some ways, just going to concerts, fishing, playing sports. But I always, when I was doing those things, I would always listen to independent radio and podcasts and, not television or mainstream media. And I just started to realize that, wow, it's pretty bad, and if we don't do something big to change the course of our nation, we could lose it. I mean, the whole idea of representative government is an experiment in this country, and it's not a given. So, one thing that I've learned over my time here at Wolfpack is that you really do have to take action, and that's one of our bottom line, part of our bottom line here at Wolfpack is just teaching people that it's really not enough to just know about the issues. It's not enough to just know that corruption in DC is affecting our lives in really negative ways. We have to be willing to maybe go out of our comfort zones a little bit, call a state legislator. In our case, and I'll explain our plan in a little bit more detail, but, call your state legislators, get to know them, meet with them in person. So, for me, it was just that first step of volunteering. I signed up on the first day that the Wolfpack existed, and at first was just helping to organize and wherever I could, and I worked my way up. I was organizing director at one point, and now national director. So it's been quite a ride, I can tell you that.
That sounds exciting. It's nice to have a leader who rises from within the organization too. I think that's always motivating. We always say you don't have to do everything, but everybody has to do something. Like if you don't get a pass just because you don't think it affects you. I watched a couple of your interviews, and I thought you did a really nice job of I think people don't understand how corruption in Washington might be affecting their lives. And I thought you did a really good job, especially explaining how corruption in Washington is somehow leading to people rationing their insulin in a lot of states. I think a lot of people identify those as two issues, but they don't see them as tied together, even though they are in just a small way, the same way that climate change is. It's all intertwined. Our bad campaign finance laws make everything worse. They make everything exponentially worse. But can you explain how corruption in Washington affects insulin prices through the rest of the country?
Yes, I can. The bottom line is that the special interests right now are overwhelming what people actually want and what's in the best interest of the American people. And so when you have pharmaceutical companies that are able to donate massive amounts to campaigns and then use their influence, when they send a lobbyist into Capitol Hill, it's not overt, right? I mean, it's not like quid pro quo, but it's implied, right? Mm-hmm. So if one of these companies sends in a lobbyist, that legislator that they're meeting with knows that they have the option to, say yes or no for campaign funds next time around, right? So our politicians they're paying attention to a lot of these special interests more than they are the American people. And I think the insulin one is a really good example because it's just so obvious that that's not what should be happening in a country where the government is supposed to be representing the people.
Right.
And there's this example of that I always hear from Cenk. Actually, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cenk Uygur. He's the founder of the Young Turks, the online news show, and also Wolfpack. And he talks about this example of this commercial that Obama ran when he was running for president about how, he was going to get those special interests out of his administration, right? That was really the big part of the change he was talking about was systemic change, right? Mm-hmm. How the actual system operates in DC. And he didn't do that, right? I think it was very early on in his administration, one of the top lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry was in his office. And, we're not allowed, our government is not allowed to negotiate prices with these companies the way that other countries are allowed to do.
Yeah.
So it's broken, and they just, at the end of the day, they just have way too much influence. And so what we're trying to do is just create more balance, and integrity to our election system where we actually matter, where the people's voice matters. And we just feel that the campaign finance system is the starting point. It's the root cause of all these issues. Another example that I'll give you is, I always try to give a left example and a right example, right? Because when you say, it's very easy to say you're nonpartisan or, we really care about nonpartisan or bipartisan issues. So I like to give examples of both. And for more conservative-minded people, one of the things that's very typical that they care about is fiscal responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. And I try to explain to people that are worried about that, our spending in Washington, D.C., that we're never going to balance our budget or get anywhere near fiscal responsibility if we're constantly giving away our tax dollars to Wall Street, right? And companies who don't even need it.
Yeah.
And don't even pay taxes in some cases. Some of them have, P.O. boxes in the Cayman Islands. And they're taking our taxpayer dollars, and it's so out of control. Like, that is not fiscal responsibility. That is basically welfare or socialism, for the multi-billion-dollar companies that don't need it, right? So I think you can make a pretty direct correlation there to our campaign finances. Right? These are the people that are donating to their campaigns. They're the people. That's where they're going to fundraisers. So that's an example on the right, and then on the left, you could use climate change. Right? Is Congress doing anything to address climate change? No.
Any Republican who's taken any money from a Koch brother has signed a piece of paper that says they won't spend any money on climate change. They can't if they want his money. So yeah, they're backwards.
There are issues on both sides of the political spectrum where people like they really genuinely want solved, right? And they're just not getting solved because Congress has just become way too dysfunctional and dependent on having to raise money. And aside from just the amount of money they have to raise, which has become obscene, the amount of time they have to spend doing so.
Yeah.
Right? So you've heard the stories, right? They have to go across the street because it's not legal to do it on Capitol grounds and into these call centers and spend, up to 70% of their time. I've heard 40 to 70% of their time raising money, and they're not calling any of us on this call, right? That's for sure. And so there's just a huge disconnect there. And so they're not able, people who are elected to go to DC to do the work of the people are just not able to do that because they're trapped essentially in this system where they have to raise all this money just to get reelected.
Yeah.
And they're not bad people. I would say most of them probably are not bad people, right? But what they're doing, by passing legislation that only benefits special interests and not the American people, is harmful, right, to ourselves and future generations. But they're not. We don't take that stand that they're bad people. We just think they're trapped in a really bad system. So that's what we're trying to do is break them out of that, break them free from that dependency. And I always tell this example, but it's just one that really stands out to me is when you see people leave Congress, they go on 60 Minutes and they talk about how much they loved representing the people in their district, blah, blah, blah. But they hated raising the money, right? It was torture. I've heard multiple people use the word torture. They absolutely hated it. So everybody wants it fixed, So we just have to have the right plan to be able to bring about that change.
Yeah.
And what progress has Wolfpack made since starting this work in moving the needle in that direction?
Yep. So I guess first I will tell you just maybe 2-minute summary of what the plan is.
Sure.
And then I'll tell you, I think it'll make more sense actually as far as what we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah.
So we have determined here at Wolfpack that this problem is so systemic that only a constitutional amendment can solve it at this point, right? A constitutional amendment is the only thing that goes above Congress, goes above the Supreme Court to be the new law of the land, and can also protect any state level legislation. So once you determine that we need an amendment, it's a fairly simple equation, actually, because there's only 2 ways to get amendments proposed according to the way Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution is written. And one of those ways is Congress. 2/3 of Congress can propose an amendment. And that means really any person in Congress can propose an amendment any day of the week. But 2/3 of each chamber would have to approve it, and then it would go out to the states, and it would need to be approved by 3/4, 75% of our states, before becoming part of the Constitution. That's one way. The only other way is 2/3 of the states can apply for a convention to be able to propose amendments. So that's what we're doing. We feel that state legislators going through state governments, getting them to apply for a convention on the topic of campaign finance reform is just the more logical path. State legislators are far more responsive to the people. They will take our phone calls. They'll meet with us. They'll hear us out. Congress, as we said, is the source of the problem. So for us, it's a logical path. And on top of that, there is actually historical precedence for using this as a way to prod Congress into action on issues that they're not addressing. So the Congressional Research Service has actually referred to it as the prodding effect, where the states are applying for a convention to address a certain topic, and then Congress ends up taking action. So, and I can go into that if you want a little bit as far as more details as far as what that precedence is, and give some examples. So that's what we're doing, and so far 5 states have actually done it. So 5 states have applied for a convention on the specific topic of fixing our broken campaign finance.
Mine's one of them.
I was just going to say, why do I feel like Illinois is one and Iowa is not? Katie's always winning. in our little competition between our two neighboring states.
Well,
Yep. Illinois
maybe
is one
someday.
of them. That was exciting. Yes.
What are the other 4 that have done that already?
So Vermont was his first state to do it.
Okay.
And then California was the second, then Illinois, New Jersey, and then Rhode Island.
Okay.
So it's funny because when I first started doing this, I constantly heard from people that you can't go through the state governments because they're just as corrupt. And New Jersey and Illinois were always the 2 examples that I heard, and they ended up being 2 of the first 5 states that stood up and actually are demanding this amendment. So,
well, it's almost like maybe Illinois, which is known for its corruption, is ready to have maybe a different reputation than than one of governors ending up in prison and etc.
So. Yeah, and or they've just seen it so firsthand, they're just so tired of it, right?
That's what happened in Montana. Like that's why they know that they don't want dark money in their politics. We talked. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but we talked in our dark money episode about Montana. But I think you also mentioned that Connecticut has like a pretty good campaign finance system going on. Like, what are they doing?
I'm definitely not an expert in it, and it's actually only been explained to me by one of the state legislators there.
Okay.
A couple years ago, so it may have even changed since I had this conversation. But they have a system that, by all accounts, works fairly well, and people in both parties appreciate it. So instead of having to go and raise all of their money through, special interest and, the typical way that a lot of legislators are forced to do it, they have a system where if they can demonstrate a certain amount of like grassroots support from their community, then they're eligible for like a fund from the state.
Okay.
So it would be like, if you can raise $5,000 from people, only $100 each, right, in your community, and get like 1,000 signatures, and the bar is obviously different for different levels of office because you have to be able to get your message out there, right? So if you're running for U.S. Senate or, I don't think it applies actually to the federal level in this case, but because I don't think it works. I don't think it's doable for them.
Mm-hmm.
But on the state level, apparently it worked pretty well. So yeah, you would and then everybody would have the same amount of money to be able to get their message out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, from what I heard, decent amount of people really like that system. I don't know if it's still in place or if they're still using it. But the point is that like there are better systems, right? We know there are definitely better systems out there than what we have right now happening in DC.
What is like the most frequent? So this seems just like a no-brainer to me, but like what's the most frequent criticism that you receive, and like who do you mostly receive criticism from?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. There's 2 main points of criticism that we get with our plan. One is it would be from people who don't think there's much of a problem, right? And it's like, those are pretty rare. I mean, if you're having a conversation about our election system, there's usually something that the person you're talking to sees wrong with it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a rare bird who says, yeah, no, everything's great. They exist. The other one is just, it's misinformation. Actually, I love the title of your show.
Thank you.
It's pretty fitting for us because we battle misinformation at Wolfpack, just around the convention process. So if you were to Google, Article 5 convention, you're going to find a lot of op-eds that just say, no, you can't go that path because, we're going to destroy the Constitution and it's, up for grabs and et cetera, right? So I would say that's our challenge right there. And the good thing is when we explain the full perspective of why we're doing it and give people the facts, they come around and they understand that, like, oh, this is definitely something we need to be doing.
That's good.
It's unfortunate that misinformation is out there. It's really just coming from 1 or 2 places, but we do have the facts on our side. So if people are interested in learning more, I would recommend going right to our website, and on the About tab, you can just go down to Resources, and we have quite a few peer-reviewed reports that have been done about the Article 5 convention process. And to my knowledge, every one that's been done is actually on our website.
Oh, cool.
And every single one of them has concluded that the states do have the power to call a convention limited to a single subject, and there are multiple mechanisms to enforce those limitations. and any notion of, the runaway convention fear is unfounded. Now, that's the Department of Justice, United States Department of Justice under Jimmy Carter and under Ronald Reagan concluded that. The Congressional Research Service has done 4 different reports. The American Bar Association, Harvard Law Review. I mean, the list goes on and on. Anybody who seriously looks at this understands that this is a totally safe process to use. And what I would say to anyone who has questions about it is, one, just read Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. It's crystal clear that it only gives the power to propose to a convention, and anything that's proposed needs to be approved by 75% of our states afterwards, like we were talking about earlier. So yeah, it's just not true. There's just nothing to back it up. And it's something that I think we'll eventually come out on top of, because I also think people realize that we're kind of running out of options.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a very safe solution. I mean, the chances of it going poorly are really, really slim. Our campaign finance is like a runaway train almost. So it's just what?
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. I mean, the chances of it going awry are they're no larger than someone in Congress right now proposing something radical and it becoming part of the Constitution, right? Because we're always going to have that ratification safeguard of 75% of our states needing to agree with it. Just think about that number for a minute. That's a huge income. 75%, 3/4.
Yeah, it would require bipartisan support for sure. I mean, red states and blue states.
Yeah, it would require massive support from the states and from the people. And our bottom line with that is anything that 75% of our states agree on should be part of the Constitution.
Yeah.
There's no other way it can work.
Yeah.
So,
who do you think? Oh, sorry. I was just saying, who do you think is more afraid of a constitutional convention? Actual people who just citizens who just don't understand, or Congress? Who would be the most difficult ones to convince?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question before, but I love it because it also puts it in perspective, right? And the answer is definitely Congress.
Yeah.
In my opinion, because what this is, it's not a threat to the Constitution or anything like that. If anything, it's a huge opportunity, right, to take our rights back. But it is a threat to Congress's power, and it's a threat to the system that got all of them in power.
Right.
And so, I think that's a really good way to look at it. And it's also a threat to their monopoly that they've had on proposing amendments for, 200 plus years, right? So there's a great story about that convention in Philadelphia, and they'd been there in hot summer, right, for 3 months, whatever it was, and it was towards the end of the summer, and General Mason stood up and he said, hey, there's a flaw here in the way that this Constitution is written, and it's that we've only given the people one way to propose changes to it, right, amendment. And that's Congress, right? And so what if Congress becomes the problem? What if Congress becomes corrupt? We're stuck. So at that point, they agreed. They said, wow, that's a pretty obvious flaw. So they put in the state-based route for proposing amendments, through the convention process. In fact, the real history is that the state-based route was the first option that they had originally when they wrote it at the beginning of the convention. And then they took it out in place of Congress, and then they ultimately decided on both again at the end. So
that's good.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it would be an amazing thing if it happened, right? So if you think about it, what a big event that would be.
Yeah.
We have the first convention called under our Constitution, first national convention, and it would just be a powerful event, and people would be covering it. I think the people going to the convention would see themselves as the new founding mothers and fathers of this country, and they would want to solve the problem, right? Because again, unless they come up with an idea that 75% of the states are going to agree on, they're wasting their time.
Yeah.
So you got to think that they're going to want to come up with something good. And so I think that's a really big part of why we're able to get bipartisan, support for our legislation. We have Republican champions. We passed in the Missouri Senate with the majority Republicans supporting it. One of them even standing up and saying, I don't know what amendment will ultimately come if we get a convention, but we have to do something about the campaign industrial complex.
Yeah.
We passed that in Missouri Senate twice, actually, and we've passed, multiple chambers controlled by Republicans. And it's not seen. It's sometimes, unfortunately, seen as a left issue, but it's really not this one. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's something that we have to do, and it's. I personally, if you're asking me if we're going to actually get that far to a convention, I kind of doubt it. Even though I'd love to see one, I think it's a democratic process. I think a convention could write a better amendment than Congress, but I just don't know if I see them giving up their power, that monopoly they've had on proposing amendments for so long.
Yeah.
I think if we get close, if we can get to 20, right now we have 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we can get 10, 15, 20, 25 states applying for a convention on the topic of campaign finance reform. I think they're very likely to propose an amendment to deal with that issue rather than letting the states come together. That's the most.
You are making a movie, right? About this? Is that still happening? Is that fully funded?
Yeah, we are. In fact, we aren't anymore, actually, which is kind of the cool thing. We started off as it started off as a project where we were going to make our own film, because some of this stuff that we're getting into here in this conversation can be a little exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that we realized. We keep getting beat. This last couple legislative sessions, we haven't been able to pass a state all the way through. And a lot of it is because of the misinformation around this process. So we said, yeah, we got to make a film, in a really professional way that makes our case. And then people are going to want to be part of this. So yeah, we did an Indiegogo campaign where we raised like $65,000, I think, to get it off the ground. And I did a lot of interviews myself. Mm-hmm. I was essentially the director. And it was great. It was a good experience. We got really good footage from state legislators all across the country, from our volunteers, from scholars, people like Lawrence Lessig, if you're familiar with him, and then it got the interest of like a real director,
nice,
a Hollywood director. Tom Donahue has done some really good films. Actually, Casting By is an amazing documentary. If you haven't seen that,
say that again. What was it?
What's that?
What was the name of the documentary again?
Casting By.
Casting By, yeah.
It's,
cool.
It's about it's about a casting director in New York City who essentially discovered like a lot of the really legendary actors like Pacino and Meryl Streep and De Niro. Like it's just an incredible story, and she never got any credit for it. So that's kind of what the movie's about, or the documentary's about. And he also did This Changes Everything most recently with Gina Davis. So.
Oh, yeah, yes.
They're a legitimate company, and I sat down with Tom to have coffee. Like, I guess it was like a year ago now, and probably last summer. And he just loved it. I told him basically what I'm telling you. Just the whole story. I said, "This is what we're doing. This is why." And he just said, "Yeah, I want to do. We want to do this." So they're going to do it.
Awesome.
So it'll be better. That's a huge plus. It'll be seen by a lot more people. And the only downside is that it'll probably take longer than we initially anticipated. We were planning to film through this legislative session, but we just couldn't because of the pandemic. There was just a lot of the state capitals closed.
Yeah.
Some of the funding, that they were looking to get for the movie, everything just became a little bit harder over the last 3 or 4 months. So
I feel like a bunch of like Zoom videos just compiled together of legislative sessions wouldn't have made for a very good movie.
Right. No, I don't think so, Morgan. I think you're right. So we're gonna wait. We're gonna be patient, and we'll have it at some point.
And then, so you're approaching this through individual states rather than going to Congress, like you explained. Partly because they don't want to give up their power, but is it also maybe partly because Congress and the Supreme Court just are often not very good at doing their actual jobs?
Yes, it is. We think exactly like what they haven't proven capable of fixing anything. So, we're going to trust them to fix like the biggest issue right now. We feel like this is the issue that our generation must solve, right? Like this is our generation's issue to fix. It's so huge. And they can't fix anything. So no, we can't trust them with this. We just can't. And especially not without putting enough pressure, right? Again, like it comes back to, accountability in a lot of ways, right? Is something that's built into our plan. So we're getting states to apply for a convention for this topic. And if if they fix this problem before we get to 34 states, great.
Yeah.
Like we couldn't care less where the amendment comes from, but we just want this problem solved. But if they don't solve it by the time we get to 34 states, then we're going to get this amendment without them. We're going to have the states come together. We're going to write, like I said, probably a better amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we're going to get it done. We're going to get it solved. And that's, that's something that I really believe is going to happen, that we're going to actually get it fixed. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people, agree with me on that. There was it's a poll that Lawrence Lessig quotes a lot, and it's a little disturbing, but I'll tell you it anyway. It's 92% of Americans want this issue of corruption in DC fixed, but 90% of those same people don't think there's actually going to be a solution, or actually believe it. Never be. So it's a pretty devastating number. I mean, I'm sure, I'm sure it fluctuates, and that's not the, but I bet it's pretty high. I don't know if it's necessarily 90% of people, of Americans, but I think they've done a pretty good job of beating us down and making us believe that there is no solution.
Yeah.
Politicians are going to come along and they're going to pretend to be saviors and they're going to fix everything. That's always going to happen. And it's going to continue, most likely, to just disappoint people unless we tackle the actual system, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why, we tell people, like, look, hey, we understand that, like, you really care about your issue. That there's no question it's crucial, but we sort of just have to take a moment here in time and just unite around this issue, or we could be in real trouble with all of these other issues. So
yeah,
I think we can do it. And the thing that makes me hopeful, and this is a little ridiculous because I always hated math growing up, but it actually is numbers and math, and the fact that there is over 300 million Americans in this country, and that many of us want this problem solved, right? 9 out of 10. Of 9 out of 10 people in a country with 300 plus million people and the internet to be able to connect like this and talk about, plans that can work. We're going to be unstoppable if we get even 1% of the population, chipping in. Like we're grassroots funded. We make, almost all of our funding comes from people chipping in just $10 a month, right? $10, $20 a month. And we've been able to get 5 state governments to apply for this, to change the Constitution with less than 5 employees, right? We have like less employees than like a local 7-Eleven, right? So, I mean, we are big time grassroots, and we've been able to accomplish pretty big change with almost no resources. So as we get our word out there, as we make a film, as more people understand, wow, there's a plan that might actually work here. This has some real teeth. We can do it, And a number that I used that initially made me hopeful was 1/3 of 1%. If we had just 1/3 of 1% of the people living in this country chipping in just $10 a month to our plan, to a plan that I feel can actually work, we would have $10 million a month.
Wow.
I promise you we can get this done. In probably 2 years if we had that kind of revenue.
Yeah.
And I think it's realistic. I just do. That's not a big number. 1/3 of 1% for a country that, is connected like this online and really cares about this issue. I think it's just a matter of informing people. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it will be hard, but it's also like our only option. So I don't know. I think, we have to work hard at it.
2020 has been such a dark year, and like everything you just said gave me so much hope that I have not had in months about really anything. So that's great. Great to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it's all true. That's the beauty, right? I mean, those numbers are real, and people are looking for a way forward, and it's almost a gut feeling, right? I mean, we know that things are bad, but I think there's a real just gut feeling that things are really off course. And if we can just figure out a way to sort of channel our energy and action towards something that can work, I think that's our path forward, and urgency though is also part of our bottom line. I tell this story. I'll tell like a super shortened version of it, but I tell the story sometimes when I'm giving our training. Of I used to live in Santa Barbara, and I lived in this little bungalow down by the beach, and we were all down one night. We were downtown one night, and just hanging out, maybe like with 8 or 10 people that lived there. And my buddy gets a call, and he's the manager, and he says, "Oh, there's been a fight at the cottages," and he goes back, and then he calls me like 5 minutes later, and he's like, "No, actually, there's a fire, right? The cottages are all on fire." Like, okay, well, that's not good. So we all start going back there, and it's like this roaring fire, right? It's out of control. You can see it from like 500 yards away, right? It's huge. And anyway, I realized at that point, like, you start thinking about like, what can I afford to lose in that situation, and what can't I? And of course, it was all roped off, right? For you couldn't get even within like 2 blocks of where we lived. And for me, it was like this one thing. It was this video camera, and it was because my dad had just got it for me. I convinced him I was going to make a documentary films with it, right?
Oh.
And this was like, a while ago, 2008 maybe, and it was before technology got cheap, so it was like a kind of a big bulky HD camera, and it was uninsured, and it was in there, and so I was like, I got to get in there, I got to figure it out. So I snuck around like a neighbor's yard, and I climbed on the roof, and I walked to the front, and I look down, and I can see my cottage. The door to it is right there. And it's like a chaotic fire scene. There's smoke everywhere and fire and firemen running around. I'm like, am I really going to jump in there? Get my camera out. And I decided to, and I went in there, and it's heavy smoke, couldn't see anything. I grabbed the camera, and I went out through the front way, because the way that I came down, like there was like this sink, and it just shattered and broke, so I couldn't escape. And I had to like step over firehouses and stuff to go out front. And it was a little embarrassing. I mean, I walk out there, there's like hundreds of people standing there, and I'm in the crowd, and I have my camera bag, and I just like walk into the crowd and disappear, right? And but the reason that I do like to tell that story when I'm teaching people about Wolfpack's plan is because I think there's a really good analogy there. That camera that I went in there to save is essentially like our form of representative government, our democracy, right? And the flames and the fire is like all these special interests and greedy big money interests that really want to just destroy it, right? They don't want the people to have a voice in our government. They are coming for it, and they're coming for it very aggressively. So I think that it is that urgent, I guess is my point. I think that if we don't get in there soon and save this thing, that it's going to just burn down, and I think we could lose it forever. Like I said at the beginning, we can't take it for granted. It was always an experiment. It was, at the time, a first in the world experiment, right? Where, hey, we're going to actually let the people, the citizens, have a say in how their government operates. It's a completely new, novel idea, right? And it's been improving for a couple 100 years. And, and it still has a lot of potential. This country has a lot of potential, but, to get the kind of change that we need to save this thing before it's too late, we're going to have to take some real action here, some bold action. And so that's what we're doing. And I think that, last point on that, why I think the urgency is now is because state legislators are responsive to us right now. Right? Like you can, no matter what state you live in, you can actually get a meeting with a state legislator, in person, at a coffee shop, at the state house. If you're persistent, and you might have to be with some of them, you will get it though, right? You will get the meeting. With Congress, it's just you could try for 5 years, right? You're just going to get a form letter back most of the time. So our representative government democracy still does exist at the state level, but it might not in 10 years from now, right? Or 20 years from now, because there are forces working there too. So that's a really big part of why we're doing this. That's why we have over 50,000 people who have signed up to volunteer, at Wolfpack, because people realize we're kind of running out of time here.
Yeah. Well, when people talk about running out of time, I think about climate change, but I don't think we can fix the climate change problem if we don't first fix dark money in politics. So yeah, I mean, even climate change is a hugely urgent issue, but you're right. Morgan and we met working at a health department. We both have master's degrees in public health, so we think a lot about systems changes, and without getting money out of politics, there's nothing else to do. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
a major
agreed.
issue.
That's right. Yeah, and we do. We have to realize and acknowledge that, if we're dividing all of our energy to all these different issues, it might not work. So there really does. I think, like I said earlier, there needs to be a point where we just unite on this issue and we say, okay, let's just focus. Let's get this fixed. Then we can start fixing all those other issues because there's going to be plenty to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even if we get an amendment that's perfect, right? That's like, wow, this is a great amendment. This really does give voice back to the people of this country. It's not going to be perfect, right? And it's not going to be played out, perfectly. And there will be plenty of work to do afterwards. But if we can build the kind of movement necessary to amend the Constitution, we will be able to do those other things. We'll be able to continue to just reform, and make our government work better. So that's hopefully what we can accomplish here in the next decade or so.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
Because I think the alternative is like an end to the American experiment. So I really hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that is the alternative. So doesn't sound like a good one to me.
Yeah, I like your story about running in to save the camera and how like the story of your home burning down is like the saving democracy. I also lost my home to a fire when I was in college. And I'm like, yeah, like the alternative is my story in which the whole place burned down and then I just had to go live somewhere else and get a cat. And like,
Right. Yeah.
that's the alternative, is just start completely all over, and there was nothing saved, and like except for maybe like a pair of shoes, and now that's it. Like that's.
And I'm sure it's a lovely cat, right? That
oh, she is wonderful. I mean, she is the closest thing I have to a soulmate. So, she's
that hurts.
Sorry, Katie.
Just kidding.
So
okay, so is Wolfpack is a PAC, but there are super PACs too, right? Or is that?
We are a super PAC.
Oh, you are a super PAC?
Technically, we are a super PAC. We like to say we're a super PAC to kill all the other super PACs. Sometimes.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Can you I don't know. Do you want to like expound on that at all?
Yeah, so super PACs are one of the things that have risen up after the Citizens United court case, mostly, right? Which essentially what it is an independent expenditure. So if we wanted to get involved in an election right now, we could do it, but we would be independent of the political candidate.
Okay.
Right? That's what that means. So like we couldn't coordinate with them. Mm-hmm. And we've done it actually a couple times. Not often, it's not something we do a lot, but we have gotten involved in a couple elections. So we did one in Maryland where we decided to back one of our champions. And he was running against somebody who had actually kind of screwed us at the last minute. Mm. So we didn't coordinate with that campaign whatsoever. We just said, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to run our own ads. We're going to do our own, canvassing or whatever else. And so that's essentially what it is. And super PACs are very transparent. By the way, a lot of people don't realize that. When you talk about dark money, what happens is the dark money goes to C4 organizations because they don't have to disclose their donors. And then the C4 will give money to a super PAC. So that's a lot of times how it works.
Oh.
So the super PAC will just say, oh, well, we got, $1 million from, Americans. Stephen Colbert used to have like Americans for a Better Tomorrow or something.
Yeah.
By the way, if you're curious about how super PACs work, I don't think anyone's ever done it better than Stephen Colbert. When Jon Stewart was actually still on the Daily Show, he had him come on, like, I think he came on the Colbert Report, and they sort of like said that he actually started a super PAC, and he explained what Jon Stewart could say to him and what he couldn't, because he was going to run it, I think, or something, or I forgot how he set it up, but it's brilliant. And so that's essentially what happened, right? So now what you have is these outside groups who are not accountable to anyone, right? So that's a big problem. And again, you don't know where the money's coming from. So yeah, maybe it gets somehow funneled through foreign governments or wherever else. We just don't know. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And another reason, just go back quickly to the why Wolfpack gets really strong bipartisan support, is because even people who agree with Citizens United for the most part see that there are changes that need to be made. So there was one senator in a state that we worked in, Republican senator, who I was telling him about our plan here, and he said, well, I agree with Citizens United, right? Like, I think that corporations should be able to give unlimited amounts of money to my campaign, but I think that they should have to exist within my district, right? So he called it the voter donor rule. So if you can't vote for me, you shouldn't be able to donate. So he didn't mind local companies being able to give to his campaign, right? He hated the idea that super PACs could funnel money through out of state into his state to influence those elections, right? So for that reason, he was actually a champion of our legislation and helped to get it passed, because even though, again, he mostly agrees with some of these court cases, he sees that we desperately need to fix this system, right? That there are things that we absolutely have to discuss, as a country. So at the end of the day, people can be in favor of just forcing the issue on the conversation, right? So if we got to a convention, all it would be is a conversation, about how to make our elections work better. And people that had that view would be able to give their opinions, and then people who had stronger views, say, oh no, we've got to go much further, would be able to give their opinion. That's how it works, right? And you discuss and you try to come to some sort of a proposal that's going to be good enough to get ratified, right, by 3/4 of our states. That's it. That we don't do anything more than that here at Wolfpack. That's the conversation. That's the amendment that we're forcing.
Got it.
That's
Morgan.
all. Just trying to amend the Constitution. That's all. That's all we're doing.
It's fine.
Yeah, I like that though. Then I really like your bipartisan examples, because we've said it before on the podcast too, where issues like this are things that people on the left and people on the right both want solved. They just might want them solved for different reasons, or the methods, or the intention might be slightly different, or even very different, but the overall identified problem that people want to get rid of or fix is the same, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on. I feel like that just maybe if more people kind of looked at it that way, and maybe didn't kind of come in guns blazing, assuming intentions, or assuming partisanship has to mean one specific thing, that these conversations maybe would be so much smoother when they're happening in Congress, or when they're happening on Facebook comment threads. Either way, I think that would just be such a much more peaceful existence. I really like this as such a great example of that.
Yeah, agreed. And speaking of peaceful existence, right? That, everything ties. It's all connected, right? Everything ties together, and it's just this whole system that we have right now of the dark money, and the special interest controlling our elections, or being able to have so much dominance in them, has led to an increase in negative ads, right? Which, and the numbers are there if you go back, and you study that, and that is causing this toxic political culture that we have, right? Like you said, you can't even post on Facebook these days, right? Without you have to worrying about who are you gonna lose for friends, right? Who's gonna defriend me today, right? It's just the whole system has created a very negative atmosphere. And it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way, because a lot of it is just made up, right? They use these wedge issues that they never end up doing anything about once they're in office anyway. They just use them because they know that those are the hot button issues that divide us.
Yep.
And they run ads and they run ads and they run more ads. And it's just really toxic. So just that alone, eliminating that, getting that even back to a place of normalcy, would actually create, I think, a little bit more harmony and peace in our just everyday lives, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then for our listeners, if they live in one of those 5 states that has already called for a constitutional convention, is there anything that they can do, any particular actions they can take to keep moving this forward?
Oh yeah, definitely. Any state. So whether we passed or not, there's plenty to do. You can help pass our resolutions in other states by phone banking. One of the things that we do is we call the constituents of legislators that that we need to pass our legislation. So, for example, if we have a committee hearing, we may call constituents of that that person, and sometimes we ask people to help us phone bank in that way. So that's one thing. We have a communications team. So you can contribute your writing skills or graphic design or tech.
Do you have like a media toolkit?
Sort of. I don't think, that's something that is actually, we've talked about for quite a while.
I mean,
but I don't know if we have anything too professional, but that's actually a good idea. We should probably have our communications team put something like that together.
I just know that our Indivisible group has like a place where we put all of our like partner groups social media toolkits so that we can like steal stuff, or just not steal, but like repost their stuff. So I was just curious. Just one.
No, we definitely have some version of that. I don't think it's very professional. Certainly be better. I'll put it that way. That's one thing. Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely just join no matter what. And even if you don't end up, staying with Wolfpack, it's still going to be a good experience for you. I've seen so many volunteers that they come and they learn the process. They learn that, wow, this is actually fairly easy to be state legislators. They become really involved in local politics. And many of them have ended up running for office themselves or, become staffers at the local state houses. And so, yeah, we'll teach you how to become an active citizen at the end of the day, right? No matter what happens with our legislation, we definitely will take the time just to walk you through that process, and it'll be rewarding either way. Sure.
That's awesome. Okay, so people can follow you at wolf_pack on Instagram and at wolfpackhq on Twitter. Where else? Like where can we start volunteering? At your website?
Yeah, the website is the best place. It's wolf-pac.com.
Okay.
And I would definitely suggest that you just sign up for the newsletter at the very least. If you don't want to volunteer, there's just a simple join form there at the top of our homepage right now. And we have a virtual workshop coming up at the end of September. And it's going to be amazing. Like, it's going to be very interesting. We usually do them in person, annual. The first one was in Chicago, actually. Nice. And then Salt Lake City, and then Dallas last year. And now, because of the pandemic, we're doing it virtually. And there's some really interesting people that are going to be joining us. It's over the course of 3 days. So it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it's trainings, about our plan, but it's also like fun events. Like, we're going to be having like a virtual Pictionary.
Oh, nice.
With just going to be a blast. And so I highly recommend just get on the email list, and we'll be sending you, updates as we move, closer towards that event in September.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Or become a member. That's the last thing I'll say too is, volunteering is great. Just staying updated is great, but we are truly, people powered. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have time, which, a lot of cases, that's more valuable than even money, right? Mm-hmm. People just don't have time. So if you don't, and you can't volunteer, just becoming a member, which is like $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever you can do, is really, really valuable to us here. So that would be another way that you can help.
Is there anything that we haven't gotten to that you hoped we would talk about before we let you go?
Good question. I'm sure. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, there is. Sure, I could tell you a little bit more. Okay. I'll tell you just a little bit about the historical precedents of using our plan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Something that people don't realize, but the majority. It's getting hot here, huh? New Hampshire summer. One thing that people don't realize, a lot of people don't realize, is that the majority of U.S. constitutional amendments have actually included a convention campaign. So we hear all the time, why don't you just do it the normal way? Right? Why don't you just go through Congress and do it the normal way? And we try to explain to people like, well, this kind of is the normal way, right? It's not unnormal for states to pass applications for a convention. In fact, there have been over 400 of them from 49 of the 50 states. So this is something the states have done a lot throughout our history. And it actually goes back all the way to the Bill of Rights, the very beginning. And Congress initially wasn't going to propose those 10 amendments. So New York and Virginia, upon seeing that, said, we're going to call for a convention to be able to propose them, right? So that might not seem like a lot of states, but that back then, that was 20% of the states needed to force a convention, right? Right now, we're only at 15. So that's one example of the states deciding to use the convention process right off the bat, early on in the history of our country. But it's been used continually since then. And the best example is probably the 17th Amendment. And that is that was late 1800s, early 1900s. The people of this country saw the way that the U.S. senators were appointed as corrupt. So we didn't get to vote for U.S. senators in the past.
Mm-hmm.
They were appointed by state legislatures. And that became a very corrupt process. Even like bags of cash being left at the state houses, right? Really overt corruption. And the people hated it. You know, they called the Senate the Millionaires Club. Of course,
It
obviously.
still is.
Now they both are.
Yeah, now they both are.
Yeah. But so what they did in response to that was they used every tool available to them. They did protest, they did ballot referendums, they did local legislation, they did state legislation, they did resolutions asking Congress to propose an amendment. All of those things are happening right now around campaign finance reform, and that's a really good thing. But it wasn't until the states came in after all that and they started applying for a convention one by one for that one specific purpose of the direct election of senators. And they got, by the way, they got all the way to just one state shy of the 2/3 needed to force a convention. And Congress finally proposed that amendment out to the states. So they didn't do it at 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, right? They were extremely stubborn about it.
Yeah.
But the states kept applying for a convention for that one purpose. And Congress ultimately did it. And then there's another example. And by the way, just that alone is enough to do this, right? For our issue, because it's very parallel situation. You're talking about the way that they got elected back then, right? They were appointed. That's the way they got into power. So when you're talking about this issue of campaign finance reform, it's how they get into power now.
Yeah.
It's a very parallel situation. And another example is in the 80s. So there was a huge push for a balanced budget amendment through the convention because Congress wasn't balancing the budget. And obviously, as I said earlier, conservatives care about this, right? This is something that they value greatly, people that are conservative-minded. And honestly, even people that are progressive-minded, right, don't want an out-of-control budget. I don't think anybody. It's seen as a conservative issue, and I use it that way a lot. But, I mean, I want fiscal responsibility, you know?
Yeah.
And I think pretty much everyone I know wants fiscal responsibility, whether they're, you know, left or right. So in the 80s, we got close to a convention, actually. We got all the way to 32 states, just too shy of the 34 needed to force a convention on that one specific topic. And this is not me saying it or Wolfpack. This is actually in the Congressional Research Service reports that I was mentioning earlier, when they studied the whole history of the Article 5 convention process. And they point out in that report that the pressure from the convention, you know, from the states applying for a convention on a balanced budget amendment is one of the things that led to Congress actually balancing the budget in the 90s. Because what it did was it led to not an amendment, but it actually led to fiscal responsibility legislation. And I mean, again, it's not. I'm not saying it's in those reports from the Congressional Research Service saying that the convention push, you know, led to that. So there's multiple examples of the states using this as a way to prod Congress into action, right? As I said before, the prodding effect. So that's important, I think, to know. And again, this is why we have to make a film, because it's exhausting to kind of explain all of the history around it and everything, right? So let's see, what else? Guess I'll just tell one more story about what it means to be bipartisan when you're talking to legislators, and something that we try to teach our volunteers.
Okay.
One, attire, right? So this is something that I've learned, because it's not obvious to everybody, right? It's something that we learned that we have to teach people, is that if you're going into a state house, it's not respectful to just kind of, you know, wear whatever you want, right? We teach people to wear whatever the culture is there, right? So we tell our volunteers to wear suits if you can, or, you know, business casual. I've been to the Hawaii State House a few times, and they wear Hawaiian shirts, aloha shirts, right? And it's disrespectful to not do that. But it's also disrespectful to wear like attire that blatantly shows that you're with one political party or another, right? Or a candidate from an election, because it can make the person that you're talking to, if they're on the other side of the political spectrum, it can make them uncomfortable. And people just don't think about that, right? Like, it doesn't even occur to them. It's just like, well, this is who I am. It's like, yeah, it's true, sure. But, you know, you're going into their home, essentially, going to their place of work, you know, where they work. So just kind of be just try to be conscious of that, and respect it. And then the other thing is we teach our volunteers to really stay on the issue. I know that can be kind of a hard one, but you're not there to talk about all of your other pet issues and all the other things that you care about. You're just not. You're there to talk about reforming our campaign finance system. And that's it. And so I learned this pretty early on myself, because I went to a meeting with a legislator that I probably wouldn't see eye to eye with on a lot of things. And he started, just to give you an example, he started writing out on a napkin why global warming is a hoax. Right? He was explaining it to me in a napkin, and I was like, okay, just letting him do his thing. Well, look, I just realized very quickly that, I didn't bring it up. That's the thing. I wasn't there to talk about that issue, and just being aware, right, that's happening, I think is really important for people that are going to meet with legislators. Because in this case, I just said, okay, well, I don't want to go down that road, so just kind of look for other things that might be, that I can connect with this person on. In this case, I came from a town. At the time, I was living in a town that right on the ocean, and so he mentioned that he goes over there to deep sea fish and stuff, and so I just decided to talk to him about that, and we talked for almost the entire meeting about deep sea fishing. He's a great guy. That's I actually thought he was good company. And we were telling stories and kind of hit it off in that way. And I'll just never forget it, because at the end of the meeting, he just stopped, right? He stopped talking. He looks at me. He's like, what the hell do you want me to do again? Right? And that right there encapsulates what it means to build relationships with legislators. And that is where real power comes from, right? That's what we try to teach our volunteers. Connect with them on a personal level about things. We don't have to, go in there and just argue about, this issue and that issue. Just get to know them a little bit. That's why companies hire lobbyists, right? Yes, they're experts on the topic, but it's also because they're there and they can get to know them, and they exchange pictures, and they know their families and all that. It's just really, really powerful. So I guess the bottom line there is always be thinking hey, there's things about this person that are probably good and we can connect on, and try to do that, try to find that. And at the end of the day, at the end of this meeting, after he asked me what the hell I was doing there, I was able to actually give him our pitch, right, about our legislation. But I was able to do it in a way that was he was so much more open, to hearing what I had to say, because he was comfortable with me now, and we were just kind of, we were just in a very relaxed atmosphere. And I gave him the elevator pitch, 2-minute summary of what we're doing. And he's like, yeah, okay, good. Well, I wish you luck, and I'll try to help, let me know how I can help. And, that's just, that's how you do it. And that's how we're going to do it. If we have volunteers getting to know their legislators, on a very personal basis in every district of every state in this country, we're going to be able to pass, we're going to be able to pass these resolutions. No question about it. I think that's it. I'm sure I have other stories, but that's probably it.
Well, that's a very
good one, though.
nice, positive
good one.
note to end on, actually, kind of.
Yeah.
Did you have any other questions, Morgan?
No, I don't think so. I think that's it for me. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all of this with us, Mike. I know that, I guess I can only speak for myself, but I have learned so much from this just short interview, and I hope that our listeners will feel the same. I'm thinking they probably will. I feel like this is one that people are probably going to want to listen to more than once, even. And I love also that now we have actionable things for people to do, to get involved, and follow you on Instagram and Twitter, and go to your website and all of that. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, and for filling us with hope that there is change coming for campaign finance reform.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to, explain our plan in detail. So really appreciate it. So thanks, Katie. Thanks, Morgan. And good luck.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Mike. You too.
All right. Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you guys so much for listening to For Your Misinformation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you like it, give us a rating and a review. It helps us find more listeners, and the more of us there are, the better.
And make sure you're following along on Instagram and Twitter at FYMI Pod.
Shout out to Kyle Dibdahl for the intro and outro music, Hope Dye for the podcast art, and Ben Schlofelt for the audio production.
We come out with new episodes every Monday.
For Your Misinformation is part of the Demcast family of podcasts.